You've just conquered the most powerful civilization on Earth. Your armies swept across everything in their path. The throne is yours. You won. Now what? Here's the problem nobody warned you about. You didn't just conquer a country, you conquered a world, and that world doesn't disappear just because you beat it in a war. It surrounds you. It gets into your court, your government, your language, your children's education, and before a few generations have passed, the people looking out from behind your empire's eyes start looking a lot more like the people you conquered than the people you came from. This is the story of how China does something almost no other civilization in history has managed. Not just surviving conquest, actually absorbing the conquerors. The Mongols, the Jurchens, the Khitan, the Manchus. Every single group that swept in with the intention of ruling China ended up being ruled by China in the deepest possible sense. Not politically, but culturally. They came in as conquerors. They left as part of China's story. To understand how this works, you need to understand the relationship between China and the people living just north of it on the Eurasian steppe. For most of Chinese history, the steppe nomads were the single biggest military threat to every dynasty. Around 800 BC, they figured out cavalry, riding full speed while firing composite bows that could punch through iron armor. Chinese armies were bigger, but the nomads were faster. They could raid a border town, take everything worth taking, and be back on the steppe before anyone could respond. Speed was their superpower. The Great Wall exists because of these people. It's basically the world's most expensive security fence. But here's what most people miss. The relationship between China and the nomads wasn't purely one of violence. A historian named Thomas Barfield figured out that the two sides actually needed each other. Nomadic leaders could only hold their own people together by extracting resources from China. Silk, grain, iron tools, and China needed the nomads to stay calm on its northern border. So the Chinese would pay massive amounts of silk and silver flowing north as tribute. Call it what you want, it was protection money, and it worked, most of the time. But sometimes a nomadic leader emerged who decided that collecting payments from China wasn't enough anymore. The real prize was the whole country, and a few of them actually took it. The Mongols are the most famous example. In roughly 50 years, starting around 1206, Genghis Khan went from uniting scattered steppe tribes to ruling an empire stretching from Korea to Poland. By 1279, his grandson Kublai Khan had conquered all of China. Every army that stood against them was destroyed. It was the most dramatic military conquest in human history. And then the absorption started. Think about the practical problem Kublai faced. His Mongol warriors numbered in the hundreds of thousands. China's population was somewhere between 60 and 100 million people. To actually govern that country, you need tax collectors who know the local tax codes, judges who understand Chinese law, officials who can manage irrigation systems, grain distribution, postal routes. You need, in short, Chinese bureaucrats. Thousands of them. And once you start hiring Chinese bureaucrats, once you move your capital to Beijing and start living in Chinese-style palaces and attending Chinese court ceremonies, the transformation has already begun. You might not even notice it happening. But day by day, year by year, generation by generation, the cultural gravity of China is pulling you in. Kublai understood this, so he declared the Yuan dynasty in 1271, positioning himself not as a foreign conqueror, but as the legitimate emperor in the long line of Chinese dynasties. He commissioned Chinese scholars to write official histories. He conducted Confucian rituals. He supported Buddhist institutions. He maintained the Grand Canal because feeding his capital required it. At the same time, he kept Mongol practices at court, maintained a strict ethnic hierarchy with Mongols at the top. The Yuan dynasty kept one foot in each world. And that tension is partly why it collapsed in less than a century. But the absorption was real. Mongol nobles took Chinese wives. Mongol officials hired Chinese tutors for their children. The court gradually filled with Chinese ceremonial elements. Chinese art and theatre flourished under Mongol patronage. Generation by generation, the distinction between Mongol and Chinese blurred. The river was already pulling them in. Now, if you want to see this process at its most deliberate, most sophisticated level, look at the Manchus. The Manchus emerged from Manchuria in the northeast, a warrior people with their own language and traditions. In 1644, they marched into a China that was already collapsing from within, took Beijing, and declared the Qing Dynasty. Here's where they did something smarter than the Mongols. They studied what had gone wrong before and made a conscious choice. They put on the costume. They adopted Confucian ideology, the philosophy that had been the backbone of Chinese government for 2,000 years. They performed the same imperial rituals Chinese emperors had conducted since ancient times. They kept the civil service examinations, the system through which China recruited its entire governing class. They maintained the same court structure, the same titles, the same ceremonies. To the Chinese literati, the educated scholar class that actually ran the empire, the Manchus were sending a clear message. Your path to power is still open. Your culture is still valued. We are not here to destroy what you built. We are here to become part of it. Confucianism, by the way, isn't just a philosophy. It's an operating system for running a society. It tells everyone where they stand. It defines how you speak to your superiors, how you honor your ancestors, how you run a government. It's baked into the language, the family structure, the educational system, the ritual calendar. To rule China, you had to speak that language. Not just spoken Chinese, but the entire cultural and political system behind it. And the Manchus became fluent in it. They performed it better than many Chinese rulers had. But it wasn't all peaceful adoption. The early Qing conquest involved real brutality. The massacre at Yangzhou in 1645, where Manchu forces killed tens of thousands of civilians after the city resisted, was one of many atrocities of the conquest. And then there was the Q order. Dogon, the regent who ran the empire in the early years, decreed that all Han Chinese men had to shave the front of their heads and wear their hair in the Manchu style. Lose your hair or lose your head. For Han Chinese men, this was deeply offensive. Confucian tradition held that the body was a gift from your parents and should not be altered. The Q was a daily, inescapable reminder of conquest and submission. People died refusing to comply, and yet within a few generations, it became normal. Children grew up knowing nothing else. By the 19th century, European travelers saw Chinese men with Qs and had no idea they were looking at a policy enforced at sword point 200 years earlier. Even coerced cultural change, given enough time, becomes absorbed into the fabric of the society it was imposed on. So why does this keep happening to China specifically? Why didn't the same thing happen to Rome or Mesopotamia or Persia? 3 reasons. First, the administrative system was simply too big and too complex to replace. By the time the Mongols arrived, China's government had been developing and refining itself for over 1,000 years. Established procedures for every single function of the state, and it was run by the literati, scholar officials who had spent their entire lives mastering those procedures. You couldn't replace them because nobody else had the knowledge. You needed them, and once you needed them, their culture had leverage over yours. Second, being Chinese was never really about blood. In most cultures, identity is biological. You're Roman because your parents were Roman. But Chinese civilization defined membership differently. The concept of Zhonghua was always more about participation than ancestry. If you followed Confucian ethics, used the writing system, honored your ancestors the proper way, performed the right rituals, you were part of the civilization. It didn't matter where your grandparents came from. This made the door open to conquerors. They just had to adopt the system, and once you adopt a system deeply enough, it stops being performance and starts being identity. Third, the numbers were overwhelming. The Manchus were maybe 2 million people governing a country of 150 million every single day, surrounded by that ocean of culture. You hire their officials. You live in their cities. You eat their food. You hear their language everywhere. Your children play with Chinese children. The practical reality is that you either adapt or you lose control. And adapting means becoming more like them every single generation. Think of it like a powerful river. You can jump in and swim against the current for a while, but if you stay long enough, the current takes you where it's going. That was Chinese civilization. The current was the language, the bureaucracy, Confucian thought and ritual, the civil service exam, the way you bowed to the emperor and honored your ancestors and ran your local government. Once you were in that river, it was very hard not to go where it was going. And it wasn't just institutions, it was everything. Food and music and art and festivals and the way you spoke to your parents. That's what the conquerors were absorbing. Not just a government, a whole world. This pattern didn't stop in the pre-modern era. Modern China still operates on a version of this same framework. The emphasis on national unity, on civilizational continuity, on the idea that being Chinese is about participating in a shared cultural and political order. When you look at how China approaches questions of territorial sovereignty, ethnic minorities within its borders, or its place in the global order, you're seeing the same civilizational logic that absorbed the Mongols and the Manchus. The methods have changed, the underlying framework hasn't. China didn't survive 2,000 years of conquest by building higher walls. It survived by being the kind of civilization that rivers move through rather than around. The Mongols came in as conquerors. The Manchus came in as conquerors. They all left as part of China's story. Not because China defeated them in the end, because China outlasted them, because the river is patient, and patience, when you're a civilization, is the deepest kind of strength there is. Thanks for watching. If you would like to see more, like, share, comment, and subscribe.